July 10th, 2015. In a Cairo hospital, Omar Sharif, the desert prince of Lawrence of Arabia, the eternal lover of Doctor Zhivago, stares blankly at a screen showing his own face. The world sees a legend. He sees nothing. Alzheimer's has stolen even his memory of himself. The man who once emerged from desert mirages like a vision of cinematic perfection now sits lost in the fog of his own deteriorating mind, unable to recognize the roles that made him immortal or remember the name that made him famous. The cruel poetry of this final scene cannot be ignored. Here lies the actor who spent his entire life becoming other people, now unable to remember who any of those people were, including himself. The eyes that once blazed with desert fire across 70mm screens now stare uncomprehendingly at images of his younger self, as if watching a stranger who happens to share his face. The voice that made hearts race in a dozen languages can barely form words in any tongue, searching for memories that dissolve like mirages the moment he reaches for them. The photographs surrounding his hospital bed tell a story he can no longer read. Omar in Bedouin robes commanding the attention of international audiences. Omar in elegant tuxedos charming Hollywood's elite. Omar hunched over casino tables losing fortunes with the same intensity he once brought to love scenes. Each image captures a different performance, a different version of the man who perhaps never learned which one represented his authentic self. "I married fame," he had once said with characteristic elegance. She was the cruelest wife. Now even that cruel wife has abandoned him. The medical staff treating Omar understand they're caring for someone significant, but the man in the bed bears little resemblance to the figure who once shared screens with Peter O'Toole and Julie Christie. They see only what remains when all performances end. A confused old man whose legendary magnetism has been reduced to occasional flickers of the charm that once captivated the world. The desert prince has returned to dust, but his kingdom was always built on shifting sand. As news of Omar's death spreads across international media on July 10th, 2015, obituaries struggle to capture someone who had lived so many different lives that no single narrative can contain them all. The boy-born Michel Demitri Chalhoub in cosmopolitan Alexandria, the Egyptian film star who married his country's greatest actress, the international icon who bridged East and West, the gambling addict who lost everything except his legend. Which version deserves remembrance? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing between these identities, but in understanding how someone became so skilled at being everyone else that he forgot how to be himself. The question haunting his deathbed is the same one that defined his entire existence. Who was Omar Sharif when the cameras stopped rolling and the applause faded? To understand how the boy from Alexandria became the man who forgot his own legend, we must journey back to where it all began, to a world where identity was always performance and authenticity was just another role waiting to be played. April 10th, 1932. Alexandria, Egypt. Michel Demitri Chalhoub enters the world in the most cosmopolitan city in the Middle East, where identity has always been fluid and belonging has always been complicated. His birth into a wealthy Lebanese Christian family provides him with everything except certainty about who he's supposed to become, setting the stage for a lifetime of masterful performances that will eventually consume the performer himself. The Alexandria of Michel's childhood represents a lost world of cultural sophistication that will vanish within decades of his birth. French colonials, Greek merchants, Italian financiers, Egyptian Muslims, Coptic Christians, and Sephardic Jews create a social tapestry so rich that no single identity can fully capture its complexity. For the Chalhoub family, this diversity represents opportunity. Their timber trading business thrives precisely because they can navigate between different communities with equal comfort and authenticity. Young Michel absorbs this cultural fluidity like a sponge, displaying an almost supernatural ability to adapt his personality to different social situations. At home, he's the dutiful Lebanese son speaking Arabic and respecting traditional patriarchal authority. At the French lycée, he becomes an elegant European intellectual discussing philosophy and literature with professors who forget he's not actually French. Among Egyptian playmates, he transforms into someone whose family has lived on the Nile for generations. Each performance is absolutely convincing because Michel genuinely inhabits these different versions of himself. The discovery of his extraordinary beauty occurs gradually, as teachers, family, friends, and strangers begin commenting on the boy's remarkable features with an intensity that makes him uncomfortable. Michel possesses the kind of face that cameras love. Perfectly symmetrical bones, eyes that seem to hold mysteries even when he's discussing homework, and a smile that makes adults want to give him whatever he asks for. But more than beauty, he radiates a quality of attention that makes everyone feel like the most important person in the world when he's speaking to them. His family's wealth shields Michel from many of childhood's typical struggles while creating others unique to privileged circumstances. The Chalhoubs live in a beautiful mansion overlooking the Mediterranean, maintain servants, send their children to elite schools, and move in social circles that include diplomats, business leaders, and cultural figures. This privilege provides Michel with every advantage except clear cultural identity. He belongs everywhere and nowhere, comfortable in any setting but fully at home in none. The boy's extraordinary intelligence becomes apparent when he begins mastering languages with the same ease that other children learn games. By age 10, Michel speaks fluent Arabic, French, and English, with enough Italian and Greek to navigate Alexandria's multicultural social landscape. But more than linguistic ability, he demonstrates an intuitive understanding of how different cultures approach emotion, relationships, and social interaction. Skills that will later prove invaluable on screen. The theatrical abilities that will eventually make Michel famous first emerge during school productions, where he consistently outshines older, more experienced performers. Drama teachers recognize something unprecedented in his approach to character work. He doesn't simply memorize lines and movements. He genuinely becomes other people with a completeness that occasionally disturbs adults watching him perform. The transformation is so thorough that teachers sometimes worry about his psychological well-being between rehearsals and performances. Perhaps most significantly, Michel's childhood teaches him that identity is performance, that authenticity means adapting successfully to different social expectations, and that charm can substitute for genuine self-knowledge in almost any situation. These lessons serve him brilliantly in entertainment while ensuring that he never develops the capacity to recognize or accept whatever authentic self might exist beneath all the beautiful performances. The teenage years bring Michel face to face with questions about his future that expose the fundamental uncertainty underlying his privileged existence. His parents expect him to enter respectable professions befitting someone of his social class, but Michel finds himself drawn to Cairo's emerging film industry, a world his family considers inappropriate for someone of their standing. The decision to pursue acting represents his first serious rebellion against expectations, but it's also his first step toward creating an identity entirely separate from circumstances of birth. The name change from Michel Demitri Chalhoub to Omar Sharif occurs when he enters Egyptian cinema in the early 1950s, but it represents more than professional rebranding. It's the ultimate performance, literally becoming someone else in pursuit of dreams that his original self could never achieve. The boy who learned to be Lebanese at home, French at school, and Egyptian among friends now becomes Omar, a name that sounds authentically Arab while being sophisticated enough for international audiences. Could anyone have predicted that the wealthy merchant's son from Alexandria would become one of cinema's most recognizable faces? The foundation is established during these formative years: the adaptability, the intelligence, the supernatural magnetism. but so are the patterns that will eventually destroy him. Michel Demitri Chalhoub disappears the moment Omar Sharif takes his first breath, and the question that will haunt his entire career becomes increasingly urgent. Can someone spend so many years becoming other people that the original person ceases to exist entirely? The early 1950s find Omar Sharif navigating Egyptian cinema's golden age with the same cultural adaptability that had served him throughout his Alexandria childhood. But the demands of film performance require something his wealthy upbringing hadn't prepared him for: the ability to be genuinely vulnerable on screen while maintaining enough mystery to capture audience imagination. For someone whose entire existence had been built on charming performance, the challenge becomes learning how to reveal authentic emotion without sacrificing the allure of the unknowable. Omar's entry into Egyptian cinema coincides with the industry's unprecedented creative flowering under directors like Youssef Chahine and Henry Barakat, who are creating films that rival Hollywood productions while celebrating distinctly Arab cultural values. For the former Michel Chalhoub, this represents both extraordinary opportunity and enormous pressure. He must prove himself worthy of joining this pantheon while overcoming prejudices against his privileged background and complete lack of formal training. His breakthrough in The Blazing Sun, 1954, reveals an actor who possesses something beyond conventional good looks or family connections: an intuitive understanding of how screen presence can transform personality into magnetism. Omar doesn't simply deliver dialogue. He inhabits characters with complete conviction while maintaining an aura of sophistication that keeps audiences perpetually fascinated. This combination of accessibility and mystery becomes his signature, making him simultaneously every woman's ideal lover and no man's completely comprehensible rival. The marriage to Faten Hamama in 1955 represents both personal triumph and professional strategy, uniting Egypt's most promising young actor with the country's most established female star. But for Omar, who has spent his entire life performing different versions of himself for different audiences, marriage presents unprecedented challenges. Faten expects a husband who can be authentic in private while maintaining his public persona professionally, a combination that Omar finds increasingly difficult to sustain as his fame extends beyond Egypt's borders. Their collaboration in films like River of Love and La Anam establishes Omar as the Arab world's premier romantic leading man. But success also begins revealing the psychological costs of constant performance. Colleagues notice that Omar seems most comfortable when cameras are rolling, as if the act of becoming someone else provides relief from the exhausting work of being himself. This pattern intensifies as his career expands internationally, ultimately making genuine relationships virtually impossible to maintain. Omar's approach to acting during this period reflects his fundamental understanding of identity as something chosen rather than inherited. He studies each role like an anthropologist examining foreign cultures, learning not just lines and movements but entire ways of being. This methodical character creation serves him brilliantly on screen while reinforcing his tendency to treat all human interaction as performance that can be perfected through practice and observation. The films that make Omar a star throughout the Middle East also establish him as cultural ambassador for the region, though he remains largely unaware of this responsibility. His portrayals of romantic heroes who combine passion with honor provide positive representation for Arab masculinity during a period when Western media typically offers only stereotypical villains and exotic sheikhs. This cultural significance becomes both blessing and burden as his international profile grows. The success of his Egyptian period teaches Omar that audiences respond not just to what actors do on screen, but to what they suggest about themselves when cameras aren't rolling. His ability to maintain sophisticated mystery while projecting genuine warmth makes him irresistible to fans who feel they know him intimately while recognizing they don't really know him at all. This paradox becomes central to his appeal, but also fundamental to his eventual isolation. As the 1950s end, Omar faces a choice that will define his remaining years. Remain Egypt's biggest star within a relatively limited market, or risk everything by pursuing opportunities in international cinema that could either make him a global icon or destroy the career he's spent years building. His decision to audition for David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia represents more than professional ambition. It's the ultimate test of whether the identity he's created can transcend cultural boundaries and succeed in the broader world. The patterns established during his Egyptian years, using performance as emotional protection, maintaining mystery as personal brand, treating relationships as extended acting exercises, will serve Omar brilliantly in international cinema while simultaneously preventing him from developing the authentic self that might have saved him from the demons waiting in Hollywood's shadows. The year Omar Sharif emerges from the desert like a mirage made flesh, transforming not only his own destiny but cinema history itself. David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia demands an actor capable of embodying the dangerous beauty of the desert while representing an entire culture to Western audiences who have rarely seen Arabs portrayed as anything more than stereotypes. When Omar auditions for Sharif Ali ibn el-Karish, he faces the ultimate test of whether his carefully constructed identity can capture global imagination. The audition reveals both Omar's extraordinary preparation and the magnitude of what he's risking by leaving his established Egyptian career. Lean seeks someone who can match Peter O'Toole's intensity while representing a completely different worldview. A bridge between civilizations that audiences can find both exotic and accessible. Omar's background as an Arab actor who speaks perfect English and understands Western storytelling provides advantages other candidates lack, but also creates pressure to represent authenticity while avoiding Orientalist cliches. The famous entrance scene, Sharif Ali materializing from desert heat waves, becomes one of cinema's most iconic moments because Omar understands he's not simply introducing a character, he's introducing an entire culture to the world. His approach combines the authority he mastered in Egyptian cinema with the mystery he's cultivated throughout his career, creating a moment that feels both inevitably dramatic and completely natural. The scene's power comes from Omar's ability to communicate absolute presence without speaking a word. The months filming in Jordan's desert test every aspect of Omar's constructed identity while revealing capabilities he didn't know he possessed. Working alongside Western actors and crew, he must constantly navigate between honoring his Middle Eastern heritage and remaining accessible to international audiences. This cultural translation becomes second nature, but it also reinforces his lifelong pattern of treating identity as performance rather than simply lived experience. The film's unprecedented success transforms Omar from regional star into global phenomenon virtually overnight. Critics consistently praise his ability to hold his own against O'Toole while creating a completely distinct and memorable character. More importantly, audiences worldwide respond to something indefinable in Omar's screen presence, a combination of strength and sensitivity that makes Sharif Ali feel both mythic and human. The Lawrence phenomenon establishes Omar as cinema's great bridge between East and West. But this cultural significance brings pressures he never anticipated. Suddenly, he's not just an actor, but a representative, expected to embody Arab dignity while remaining approachable enough to star in Hollywood productions. This impossible balancing act would challenge anyone, but for someone whose entire identity has been built on performance and adaptation, it represents both ultimate validation and the beginning of psychological patterns that will eventually destroy him. Doctor Zhivago in 1965 cements Omar's status as the world's premier romantic figure. But the role also exposes the emotional costs of constantly embodying other men's passions, while struggling to access his own authentic feelings. Lean's epic requires Omar to channel profound romantic longing across decades of a character's life, demanding emotional depths that his years of performance-based existence have made increasingly difficult to locate. The man who makes millions believe in eternal love finds it nearly impossible to maintain relationships lasting longer than production schedules. The success of Zhivago provides Omar with everything he thought he wanted: global recognition, financial security, access to the most exclusive circles. But these achievements feel hollow because they're built on performance rather than genuine self-knowledge. Between Lawrence and Zhivago, Omar has become one of the world's most famous men while feeling more isolated than ever from authentic human connection. Funny Girl in 1968 gives Omar his most psychologically complex American role, playing opposite Barbra Streisand as Nick Arnstein, a charming gambler whose love for Fanny Brice cannot overcome his compulsion to risk everything on cards. The character hits uncomfortably close to patterns Omar is developing in his own life, as if the role serves as prophecy for the self-destructive behaviors that will consume his later years. The irony becomes apparent to those watching closely. Omar's peak period of international success coincides with his marriage to Faten Hamama falling apart, severing his final connection to the cultural identity that had originally shaped him. When the marriage ends in 1974, Omar completes his transformation from Michel Demitri Chalhoub into someone who exists primarily as a series of roles, each more elaborate and distant from authentic selfhood than the last. The gambling that begins as sophisticated entertainment at Monte Carlo casinos gradually reveals itself as something more compulsive and dangerous. Omar's approach to cards mirrors his approach to acting. He studies systems, analyzes probabilities, applies intelligence to activities that ultimately depend on forces beyond anyone's control. But where adaptability serves him brilliantly on screen, it becomes liability at gaming tables where consistency matters more than charm. As the 1960s end, Omar finds himself at the pinnacle of international stardom but increasingly distant from anything resembling genuine satisfaction. He has achieved global recognition while losing the capacity for authentic relationships, accumulated vast wealth while developing expensive compulsions, become everyone's ideal lover while remaining essentially alone. The desert prince who emerged from mirages has become a mirage himself, beautiful from a distance but dissolving under closer examination. The 1970s arrived like a slow-motion catastrophe disguised as continued success, with Omar Sharif maintaining his status as international cinema's most sophisticated leading man, while privately descending into gambling addiction that transforms expensive entertainment into existential compulsion. The man who once commanded attention through sheer screen presence now seeks the same intensity at casino tables, trading his legendary magnetism for the false promise that the next hand might restore whatever sense of authentic purpose fame has systematically eroded from his existence. The gambling begins at Monte Carlo's elegant gaming rooms, where Omar fits perfectly among European aristocrats and international celebrities who treat high-stakes card games as natural extensions of their sophisticated lifestyles. But what starts as social activity gradually reveals itself as something far more dangerous. A compulsion that provides the only moments when Omar feels genuinely alive, when his carefully constructed personas fall away, and he confronts pure chance without the protection of charm or performance. The psychology driving Omar's attraction to gambling reflects the same patterns that made him a great actor but twisted into self-destructive directions. At card tables, card His legendary looks, linguistic abilities, and cultural sophistication provide no advantages. Success depends entirely on factors beyond his control, offering a form of authenticity his professional life increasingly lacks. The supreme irony. The man who built his career on controlling every aspect of his image becomes addicted to situations where control is impossible. His approach to cards mirrors his approach to character creation. Methodical study of systems, careful analysis of opponents, application of intelligence to activities that ultimately depend on forces beyond rational analysis. Omar treats gambling like advanced acting preparation, convinced that the same techniques that made him a star can be applied to mastering games of chance. This fundamental misunderstanding of probability versus performance ensures that even his victories reinforce dangerous patterns of risk-taking. The financial losses escalate predictably, following patterns familiar to anyone who understands addiction's mathematics. Initial setbacks, tens of thousands lost during individual evenings, seem manageable for someone earning millions per film. But gambling addiction operates according to merciless logic. Each loss must be recovered through bigger bets, creating ever-escalating cycles that eventually threaten not just wealth but entire carefully constructed international reputation. The secrecy required to maintain his gambling becomes more devastating than the financial damage. Omar's addiction demands increasing amounts of time and deception, making authentic relationships impossible while forcing him to construct elaborate lies about his whereabouts and activities. Friends and family find themselves dealing not with the charming, sophisticated star they thought they knew, but with someone whose entire existence has become organized around feeding compulsions that consume more of his identity each month. His film work during this period reflects the psychological chaos gambling creates in his private life. While Omar continues delivering professional performances in projects like The Last Valley and Isabel Eberhard, colleagues notice subtle changes, the effortless confidence that once characterized his screen presence showing cracks, as if uncertainty and desperation from his gambling losses are seeping into professional performances. The divorce from Faten Hamama in 1974 represents more than the end of a marriage. It's the severing of his final connection to authentic cultural identity. Faten had represented Egypt, stability, and the possibility of love based on genuine understanding rather than mutual performance. When that relationship fails, Omar loses his last anchor to the Michel Demitri Chalhoub, who had once existed beneath all the beautiful performances. International press coverage of Omar's gambling problems begins appearing by the mid-1970s, transforming private struggles into public scandals that damage his reputation and limit professional opportunities. Stories circulate about massive debts to European casinos, legal troubles in various countries, and increasingly erratic behavior that makes him uninsurable for major productions. The image of sophisticated international charm gives way to something sadder and more desperate. In 1979, Omar faces bankruptcy proceedings in Italy after losing approximately $2.5 million at Roman casinos, leading to the temporary confiscation of his passport and international travel restrictions that humiliate him professionally. The incident makes headlines worldwide, completing his transformation from romantic idol to cautionary tale about the dangers of compulsive gambling. Yet even these consequences fail to interrupt patterns that have become more important to him than career or reputation. The most tragic aspect of Omar's decline involves his inability to recognize that gambling has become a substitute for the authentic identity he never developed. The boy who learned to use performance as protection from self-examination has become a man who uses cards to avoid confronting the emptiness that constant performing created. Each loss reinforces his need to gamble more, while temporary wins provide false hope that keeps the destructive cycle continuing indefinitely. As the 1970s end, Omar's life resembles a cruel inversion of his greatest screen roles. Instead of the romantic hero who wins love through charm and determination, he becomes someone who loses everything of value through compulsion and self-destruction. The Desert Prince of Lawrence has become a wanderer lost in casino labyrinths, searching for something that cannot be found regardless of how much he's willing to risk pursuing it. The 1980s witness Omar Sharif's gradual transformation from international icon to elegant ruin, a man whose legendary charm can no longer conceal the devastating effects of decades spent gambling away not just his fortune, but his sense of authentic identity. Living between hotels and casinos, dependent on residuals from past glories and increasingly modest character roles that trade on his faded mystique, Omar becomes a living ghost of his former self. Still recognizably the man who once emerged from the desert, but now wandering through a different kind of wasteland entirely. The financial devastation proves complete by the early 1980s. The millions earned from Lawrence, Zhivago, and other classics have vanished into casino coffers across Europe and America, leaving Omar dependent on friends' charity and whatever small roles his diminished but still recognizable name can command. The man who once earned astronomical salaries now accepts any offer providing enough money to fund his next gambling session, each paycheck becoming merely an advance on future losses. The social isolation proves even more devastating than bankruptcy. The charm and sophistication that once made Omar welcome in every exclusive circle now feel desperate and performative, as if he's constantly auditioning for acceptance rather than naturally commanding it. Former friends avoid him, knowing that any encounter will inevitably involve requests for loans or lengthy justifications for his latest casino disasters. The physical deterioration becomes unmistakable to anyone remembering Omar's legendary screen presence. The perfect posture gives way to slumped shoulders of someone carrying invisible burdens. The penetrating gaze becomes unfocused and searching, and the melodious voice that once made hearts race now carries undertones of exhaustion and defeat. Even his trademark elegance shows cracks, as if maintaining his public image requires more effort than his increasingly desperate private reality can support. The film roles available during this period reflect Hollywood's complex relationship with fallen stars, projects that provide work while constantly reminding him of everything he's lost. Playing grandfathers in family films, villains in television movies, and cameo appearances that reference his past glory, Omar continues working primarily as a reminder of who he used to be rather than exploration of who he might become. In 1990, Omar publishes his autobiography, The Eternal Male, but the book reads more like elaborate self-justification than honest self-examination. He describes his gambling as research for roles, his rootlessness as sophisticated cosmopolitanism, and his isolation as the natural price of international stardom. The man who spent his career becoming other people proves incapable of honest reflection about his authentic self, even when given unlimited pages to explore the question. The geographic rootlessness that once seemed sophisticated now reveals itself as profound displacement. Omar moves between Paris apartments, London hotels, and Cairo visits like someone who belongs nowhere completely, gambling away any possibility of establishing permanent residence while maintaining pretenses that constant movement represents freedom, rather than desperate search for somewhere that feels like home. The few moments of genuine honesty during this period provide glimpses of who Omar might have been if he'd ever allowed authentic self-examination. In unguarded interviews, he occasionally admits to loneliness, regret, and confusion about how his life reached such devastating circumstances. "I had roles, not roots," he confesses to a French journalist in 1995. "I was everyone's lover on screen, but in reality I slept alone." The gambling continues even as Omar's resources dwindle to almost nothing, but the compulsion has evolved from pursuit of wealth into something resembling suicide by installments. Each bet represents not hope for recovery but confirmation of fundamental worthlessness, creating psychological patterns that make recovery impossible even if he wanted to attempt it. The addiction has become the only reliable relationship in his life. A 1998 incident at a Nice casino perfectly captures Omar's tragic circumstances. Recognized by younger gamblers who remember his films, he's asked for autographs while simultaneously being escorted out for inability to cover his losses. The photograph taken during this humiliation, Omar's still handsome face showing embarrassment and rage, becomes symbolic of his complete fall from cinematic royalty to gambling casualty. As the new millennium approaches, Omar exists in twilight state that reflects everything tragic about celebrity culture's relationship with aging and failure. Still recognizable, still capable of producing the charm that once made him irresistible, but performing these familiar routines without substance that once gave them meaning. He has become a professional version of himself, Omar Sharif as portrayed by someone doing an impersonation of Omar Sharif. The question haunting his final decades transcends regret about gambling losses or career mistakes. It's the deeper tragedy of someone who spent so many years becoming other people that he never developed capacity to simply be himself, whatever that might have meant. The desert prince who once represented the possibility of bridging different worlds has become someone who belongs to none of them, forever wandering between identities that feel equally artificial and unsatisfying. July 10th, 2015. Omar Sharif's final performance ends not in applause, but in the terrible silence of a Cairo hospital room, where Alzheimer's disease completes what gambling addiction and rootless fame had begun decades earlier. The complete erasure of whatever authentic self might have existed beneath all the beautiful performances. The man who spent 70 years becoming other people dies unable to remember who any of those people were, including the legend the world will mourn. The medical chart records his condition in clinical language, but it cannot capture the profound irony unfolding within his deteriorating mind. Alzheimer's doesn't simply steal memories, it murders identity one neuron at a time, executing the self through systematic destruction of everything that made a person recognizable to themselves. For someone whose entire existence had been built on the ability to become other people, losing the capacity to remember who he himself had been represents the cruelest possible ending. The photographs scattered around his bedside tell stories he can no longer read. Omar in Bedouin robes commanding international attention, Omar in elegant tuxedos charming Hollywood's elite, Omar hunched over casino tables losing fortunes with characteristic intensity. Each image captures a different performance, but none reveals whatever authentic person might have existed beneath all the carefully constructed personas. The man who married fame discovers that even his cruelest wife eventually abandons her victims. In moments of lucidity that become increasingly rare, Omar sometimes speaks about his childhood in Alexandria. But the memories feel borrowed from someone else's life rather than personally experienced. He mentions Michel Demitri Chalhoub as if discussing a character he once played, unable to connect that long-disappeared boy with the failing body that carries his current confusion. The ultimate method actor has forgotten which role was supposed to be his real life. The Egyptian government's decision to provide state funeral honors recognizes Omar's cultural significance as someone who brought positive Arab representation to international cinema during periods when such visibility was desperately needed. But the ceremony feels like tribute to someone who died years before his body finally surrendered, honoring the public figure while acknowledging that the private person had disappeared beneath gambling debts and geographical rootlessness long ago. The international obituaries struggle to balance genuine artistic achievements against self-destructive patterns that consumed his later years. the cultural bridge building between East and West against the personal tragedy of belonging fully to neither world. How do you eulogize someone whose greatest performance was convincing the world that Omar Sharif actually existed, rather than being simply another character portrayed by someone whose real identity remained permanently unknowable? The global fan response reveals the unique relationship Omar maintained with audiences who felt they knew him intimately, while recognizing they had only encountered carefully constructed versions of his public persona. Social media tributes focus on his most memorable moments: the desert entrance in Lawrence, the passionate romance of Zhivago, the charming rogue of Funny Girl. But these celebrations inadvertently emphasize how completely his authentic self had been consumed by the roles he played. Perhaps the most fitting tribute comes from film critics who recognize that Omar's greatest performance had been the lifelong portrayal of someone living successfully, while privately struggling with compulsions that made genuine happiness impossible. This meta-theatrical aspect of his existence, performing contentment while experiencing chaos, represents method acting that consumed his entire biography. The final mercy comes from Alzheimer's itself, which erases memories of gambling losses, broken relationships, and career disappointments that tortured him during his decline. In forgetting everything, he also forgets the sources of shame and regret that made his final decades unbearable. The disease that steals his identity also frees him from the burden of remembering how completely he had lost himself in pursuit of universal love and approval that never provided the satisfaction it promised. As Omar Sharif is laid to rest in Cairo on July 13, 2015, the man being buried bears almost no resemblance to the figure being eulogized. The boy named Michel Demitri Chalhoub, who dreamed of becoming someone else entirely, succeeded beyond his wildest imagination, transforming himself into one of cinema's most beloved figures, while simultaneously ensuring that no authentic self survived to enjoy the achievement. The Desert Prince returns to dust, but the Mirage lives on in flickering images that continue captivating new generations. Omar Sharif achieved the immortality that only cinema provides, but at the cost of the mortal happiness that comes from knowing and accepting your authentic identity. He became everyone's lover on screen while remaining stranger to himself, the ultimate embodiment of cinema's beautiful lie that some people are more real in performance than in life. The man who emerged from the desert like a vision has become eternal precisely because he was never quite real to begin with. Omar Sharif was always a magnificent performance, a carefully constructed identity that convinced the world of its authenticity while hiding the fact that no genuine person existed behind the charm, the sophistication, and the supernatural magnetism. In death as in life, he remains what he always was: a perfect mirage that continues to shimmer in memory long after the desert that created it has claimed its beautiful, impossible creation.